Okay, good afternoon. My name is Alan Skinner. I am a student in the Liberty University's History PhD program, and I also have the privilege of working in the public history field as an Army historian at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And standing here today on Fort Jackson, I'm at the grounds of the Dozier House, the oldest structure on the installation. But of importance to my topic today, though, is this modest bronze plaque and concrete pillar standing next to me. And what it does is it commemorates the location of the first camp headquarters and flagpole for Camp Jackson, which was established in August of 1917. So in my discussion today, I'm going to briefly talk about the history of Camp Jackson, and more importantly, connect Camp Jackson to the history of an unbroken 103-year Army tradition. When the United States declared war against Germany in April 1917, Army strength stood barely over 208,000 officers and men. On 18 May 1917, Congress passed the Selective Service Act, authorizing the expansion of the Army to 4 million men in three components: the Regular Army, National Guard, and the National Army. National Army divisions were created from men inducted via the Selective Service Program and led by a mix of hastily trained and promoted National Army and regular officers. On 5 August 1917, the War Department ordered the constitution of the 81st Division National Army at Camp Jackson, South Carolina. Created from land east of downtown Columbia, which included a portion of ex-Confederate General Wade Hampton's estate, the camp was named in honor of President Andrew Jackson. On 25 August 1917, the 81st Division officially activated at Camp Jackson, with leader cadre beginning to arrive to organize the division. Among the first arrivals were Green Junior officers who underwent a crash course of drill, marksmanship, and physical fitness under the tutelage of regular officers. One new National Army lieutenant observed to his family, quote, "These were the days of preparation. The officers placed in waiting for the coming of the draft worked and studied while waiting," end quote. The first wave of selective service draftees from Tennessee and the Carolinas arrived in mid-September of 1917 and were organized into squads led by equally new non-commissioned officers. The newly drafted men experienced a culture shock. Quote, "Camp Jackson on September 5th, 1917 was quite different in appearance from what it was a few months later. The camp was located on a ridge of thickly wooded sand hills. Just enough trees and stumps had been removed to provide for the construction of the large wooden barracks. These training camps were built under government emergency order, and much of the manual labor left to the rookies who were to be trained in them, just as if such work was necessarily a part of their military training," end quote. As the new division took shape, officers and enlisted men were constantly pulled from Camp Jackson to fill other combat divisions deploying to France. Despite the turmoil, the division began to develop pride and esprit de corps under the strict leadership of the regular officers. Training included basic soldiering skills, drill, calisthenics, and combat training with the bayonet, rifle, and automatic weapons. When the War Department ordered each Army division to adopt a unique insignia for identifying equipment and baggage, the 81st Division adopted a Wildcat emblem. One story holds the Wildcat was symbolic of Wildcat Creek that ran through the division's training areas. A second story holds the Wildcat name was adopted after some country boys in uniform trapped a Carolina Wildcat as the unit's mascot. Whatever the reason, the division adopted that Wildcat insignia, accompanied with the motto, obedience, courage, loyalty. When Division Commander Charles Justin Bailey conducted a pre-deployment tour of the Western Front, General Bailey noticed the practice of British and French troops wearing distinctive colored uniform emblems for identification purposes. Upon his return to Camp Jackson, General Bailey canvassed his officers on the merits of creating a unique uniform insignia for the 81st Division. Colonel Frank Halstead, commander of the 321st Infantry, suggested the adoption of the already existing Wildcat, a proposal approved by a council of colonels. Sergeant Dan Silverman, a pre-war commercial artist, is credited with creating a uniform insignia of a black Wildcat silhouette superimposed on a circular olive drab wool cloth patch. To further differentiate the elements of the division, specific colors were assigned to the subordinate units. And on his own authority, Bailey authorized the creation and wear of the wildcat patches on the left shoulder sleeve of the uniform. In May 1918, the 81st Division was ordered to Camp Sevier in upcountry South Carolina. The movement was tragically marred when a troop train fell from the railroad trestle spanning Wildcat Creek. Despite heroic rescue efforts, 9 soldiers died in the wreck, with a further 25 requiring medical treatment. And after a short period of Camp Sevier to absorb replacements, the 81st Division entrained to Long Island, New York, where on 30 July 1918, the division began to sail for Europe. When the division was embarking at the port commander spotted the unauthorized Wildcat uniform insignias and castigated General Bailey for the breach of regulations. The port commander ordered the removal of the insignias and sent a telegram to the War Department to report Bailey's irregular conduct. However, the division sailed for France before the War Department bureaucracy could respond to the infraction. Once safely at sea, General Bailey cheekily ordered the restoration of the Wildcat patches. And the sailing accommodations for the Wildcat soldiers varied. Quote, "Certainly nothing about these boats, the mess and the crews in particular, improved upon acquaintance. The boats had a smell of their own. A stench rose from the hatches that made one think of suicide. The odors from the kitchen were positively nauseating. The urgent need of men in France made it necessary to estimate a boat's capacity by the standing room a man required, rather than space needed for his health and comfort. This 12-day voyage on the troop ships was a real test of our stomachs, health, patience, and morale. The fact that we survived this test with no loss of life, no accident, very little sickness, was a fair indication of how the 321st Infantry would meet the supreme test soon to come." The 81st Division arrived in France as the Allies were preparing a series of offensives to clear German troops from French soil. After final training and preparations, the 81st settled into the defensive lines protecting the quiet Sandy sector in the northeastern part of France. Infantry regiments rotated in and out of the front line and performed nightly infantry patrols to probe the German defenses for weaknesses. The 81st Division passed its baptism of fire when the Wildcat soldiers successfully repelled a German trench raid on the night of 9-10 October 1918. Although the 81st Division had proved itself in combat, General Bailey once again found himself back in hot water with the Army bureaucracy. After an amorous American Wildcat was featured in a risque French newspaper cartoon, a War Department telegram demanded that Bailey, quote, "furnish authority, if any, for wearing the Wildcat in cloth on both left sleeve and overseas cap. It is gathered that no previous authority was officially given to any organization for this addition to the uniform," end quote. Instead of buckling under pressure, Bailey forwarded the telegram, along with a personal endorsement to General John J. Pershing, Commanding General of the American Expeditionary Force, or the AEF. After admitting that, quote, "no official sanction had been given for the wearing of the emblem on the uniform," Bailey continued by explaining in detail the events leading up to the adoption of the distinguishing symbol in this manner and the advantages of the usage of such as symbol, end quote. Bailey then drove to AEF headquarters to justify his decision, a risky proposition as General Pershing had a well-deserved reputation as a strict disciplinarian. As the story goes, Bailey touted the advantages of a shoulder patch and boosting the morale of the soldiers. Won over by Bailey's eloquent appeal, General Pershing approved the use of the patch, reportedly saying, "All right, go ahead and wear it and see to it that you live up to it." Pershing's headquarters sent out an official memo on 18 October 1918, which ordered each division commander to submit a uniform insignia design for review and approval. The next day, the 81st Division received approval of their existing Wildcat design, thus establishing the Wildcat as the first divisional patch of the modern Army. The practice of unit insignia became so deeply ingrained in the AEF that articles in the Stars and Stripes chronicled how soldiers fought to continue wearing their unit patches even when transferred to other units. Bailey's innovative effort to improve the esprit de corps of his division resulted in a new Army tradition that is continued unbroken for over 103 years. So as you'll note, some very great stories about the beginning of an Army tradition and its connection to Camp Jackson. After the war, historians of the War Department credited the 81st as having the first patch of the Army, but supporting primary source details are unfortunately lacking. Over the past several years, I've tried to locate primary sources to confirm many of the details. Through research in the National Archives, I was able to locate several corroborating documents, as are seen here. However, I fear I will not be able to definitively document the story of the Wildcat Patch. First, after querying Bailey's family, I found his personal papers had been destroyed by his widow. Secondly, Bailey had a demonstrated tendency to skirt the regulations, and the earliest memo that is shown here has a very interesting remark, quote, as directed by verbal orders, end quote, in the ordering of uniform emblems, indicators that Bailey deliberately avoided generating a paper trail. So I still have the possibility of research in the collections of Bailey's subordinates and the paper archives of General Pershing's correspondence. As a retired soldier, I still have in my closet uniforms with insignia from units I served with in combat operations, my personal link to unit history and esprit de corps, and the continuity of the Army history. However, as a professional historian, I must not allow traditions or my own personal feelings to detract from sober historical analysis and interpretation based on primary source research. Although the story of the Wildcat Patch is a compelling one, there's much work to be done to fully confirm or reinterpret the tradition with primary source documentation. Thank you for your time today, and this concludes my presentation.